Hello, I'm Vincent from Acadia Images Photo Workshops. Today I'd like to talk to you about sharpness. Sharpness is a broad topic and touches on a lot of techniques used in photography. But today we want to go over some of the basic skills to get you producing reliably sharp images. So we should start by defining what sharpness is. Sharpness in an image is an immediate transition between colors or values. If we have a red subject on a black background, the transition between the edge of the red and the beginning of the black should happen immediately. In an out-of-focus picture, you'll notice that there's a gradient between the red and the black. It's not a sharp edge. There are three things that impact sharpness in a negative way. One is if your subject is moving too fast for your shutter speed. Another is if the camera is moving, or if the camera is vibrating, and there's lots of sources for this. The third thing is an inaccurate focus. So how do we tackle each of these challenges so that we can produce sharp images? Well, we'll start with the first one. If our subject is moving, we have to have the correct shutter speed for it. That's all there is to it. That may mean that we have to increase our ISO, open our aperture wider. Somehow we need to get a fast enough shutter speed to freeze that action. An alternative, if we can't freeze the action, is to attempt to pan with the subject. Now this takes practice. Stability is a key ingredient in getting sharp images. For handheld shooters, a stable posture is key. A wide-footed stance, tucking the elbows into the sides, and resting the brow against the camera provides a tripod against your torso. It's important to support under the lens with one hand and have a firm grip with the other. Also, when you depress the shutter button, try to do it in a slow, controlled manner. I find pressing with the first knuckle of my index finger to be a little bit more reliable, more controlled than if I press with the tip of my finger. It's more of a squeezing action instead of a pulling or pressing action. For tripod users, first I recommend having a good quality tripod. That's a solid set of legs and a user-friendly ball head. I also recommend, if you can, getting a non-proprietary quick release plate. This allows you to interchange your camera with other ball heads, or as your gear collection expands, you've got more options for attachment. With the ball head, there's one main control knob that loosens the camera and allows you to position it for the correct composition. And when you set whatever angle you want, you tighten down that knob, and now your camera is solidly locked in the position you want it. Now, we've eliminated a substantial amount of shake, vibration, any sort of movement. This camera is now perfectly still. But what happens when I go out to take a picture? I reach forward, I touch the camera, I press the shutter button, and all of a sudden I've introduced my body's vibrations into this system. So we need to isolate ourselves from the camera. And for this, we need a remote control. There are wireless remote controls and there are cable remote controls. This one is a cable and it plugs in to the side of my camera. It's a very simple piece of equipment. It is a shutter button, just like the one in the front of your camera. Only thing now, I can press it without touching my camera. This eliminates any vibration I can introduce, unless of course I kick the tripod legs, which happens. So you'll want to make sure that you don't hit your tripod or your camera, and you use a cable release to trigger your shutter. Now that's solved most problems for most exposures. But when we get to very slow shutter speeds, we could see some blurriness from internal vibrations caused by the camera's mirror. There's a solution for this too. It's called mirror lockup. Check your user manual for where to enable this function. For me, it's in my custom functions menu, and I use it so often it's become muscle memory. What it does is changes the function of your shutter button. Now when I press this, the camera flips the mirror up and locks it up. It doesn't take a picture. It just removes the mirror vibration from the equation. Now I can wait a couple seconds, the vibration should dissipate, and I can press the shutter button again to take my picture. So we have different levels of vibration management here. We can just have a tripod. That helps a lot. We can have a tripod and a cable release, and that helps more. But if we're dealing with very slow shutter speeds, we can enable mirror lockup to eliminate almost every source of vibration. There are, of course, pros and cons to tripod shooting and handheld shooting. Tripods are not appropriate in all situations. Certainly working in crowds, street photography, and a lot of travel photography, they just are too cumbersome and too intimidating for many of your subjects. In this situation, it's important to be able to shoot handheld and get sharp images. Now, handheld shooting has its limitations as well. Getting slow shutter speeds handheld is a challenge. So if you're looking for those silky waterfalls and beautiful stream images where all the water is a blur, that's going to require a tripod, and there's not really a way around that. Other situations where handheld doesn't perform as well is when you want that great depth of field in landscape photography. When you set a high aperture, you get a slow shutter speed, and unless you're going to compromise your image quality with ISO, you're going to want a stable platform so that you can have that long exposure, small aperture. Now we need to discuss the second aspect of getting sharp images, which is accurate focus. Both manual focus and autofocus can be incredibly accurate, but we need to know how to use each. I highly recommend that everybody become familiar with their manual focus mode, because when autofocus can't make a lock, you can easily switch to manual mode and get accurate focus. Manual mode relies on your eyesight, which can be a challenge for some of us, especially with that tiny viewfinder. There's a solution for this. On the back of your camera, there's often a live view function. This allows you to see what you're going to take a picture of on your LCD screen, real time. You also can zoom in on it and make very accurate manual focus adjustments. We use this often when we're taking macro photography because it's the most accurate way for us to focus. For autofocus users, you'll want to be familiar with your autofocus system and how to change autofocus points. You'll want to position a point over your subject and know what situations your autofocus system doesn't work well in. This is typically low contrast or low light, or looking into the sun. Now that we've discussed how to shoot from a stable platform, either handheld or on a tripod, and we've discussed how to get accurate focus in both manual and autofocus modes, we need to look at some myths and misconceptions that go along with sharpness. One myth is that you can fix it in post-processing. Sharpening in post-processing increases the contrast along boundaries. If we look at a blurry transition or an out of focus transition from one color to another, and then we sharpen it, we may increase the contrast, and our brain may perceive it as sharper, but upon close inspection, it's still out of focus. The next misconception that we need to deal with is depth of field. This is touted by a lot of photographers as being a solution to focus and sharpness, but it's not. There's only one focal plane. It's parallel to your sensor. You cannot focus at an angle or have multiple layers truly in focus. Depth of field increases the recognizability of things that are not perfectly in focus. So you may be able to recognize it, and to a certain point, you can get it so recognizable that you can't distinguish it from what's sharp. But technically, there's only one place in your image that's truly sharp. Along with depth of field comes hyperfocal distance. This is a true optical phenomenon. It's not a myth, but its implementation is extremely difficult. It requires you to set your focus to a very precise distance. My lens here is marked 2.5 feet, 3 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, and then infinity. If I'm supposed to focus at 16 feet or 47 feet, well, I simply don't have that fine of adjustments on this lens. What's more, I would need to know how far my subject is away from me. Hyperfocal distance does have its applications, usually in wide-angle landscape photography, but most of the time, we're not going to be making calculations in the field and measuring distances. So hyperfocal distance is not a solution to sharpness, just like depth of field is not a solution to sharpness. In conclusion, we need to have a solid platform to shoot from. Whether we're handheld or using a tripod, we need to be stable. And we need to have accurate focus. We should be familiar with both our manual focus mode and our autofocus mode to make sure that we have the flexibility for the correct situations.